This is Megan Baumhardt with her persuasive speech about compounding pharmacies.
Lorena Gonzalez suffered with her adrenal regulation, and because she was allergic to eggs, a common filler in prescription medication, she had to replace her prescription with Stonegate Compounding Pharmacy in South Austin. The Washington Post on May 3rd, 2018 details 3 months later, after waking up from a 5-day medically induced coma, Gonzalez and her husband sought answers to her health crisis. The answer? Her 10 milligram prescription actually contained 38,000 milligrams, 54,000% of what her doctor recommended. It took 3 years for Stonegate Compounding Pharmacy to receive any sort of punishment, and Reuters on September 1st, 2019 estimates nearly 400,000 Americans use compounding pharmacies every year. And since they started tracking in 2003, nearly 200,000 Americans have been harmed by compounding pharmacies. Due to the prevalence of this issue, it becomes vital that we understand first the history of the industry, the problems that still persist, and then what we can do to help solve this crisis. Jocelyn Stevens described her seizure disorder as manageable, easily taken care of with a vitamin B12 shot. ABC News on September 4th, 2018 explained Stevens placed her prescription with a compounding pharmacy, and upon injection in her arm, she received a painful, burning sensation. She was rushed to the ER, where she was informed she had received a chemical burn. Her injection had a pH level of 13.9, higher than concentrated bleach. Stevens exemplifies the complications the government was attempting to protect against. First, in order to attempt to solve the problem of compounding pharmacies, we must understand its background. So, background information, and then the historical crisis. First, compounding pharmacies were common prior to the 1900s, when doctors would both prescribe and compound medication themselves. Since the 1900s, however, the FDA on their own website supplied that this process has been institutionalized into the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. They continue that compounding pharmacies are pharmacies that are able to produce small batches of medication without the common fillers that others are allergic to, allowing people with allergies access to the medication that they so desperately need. In 2003, in an attempt to regulate this industry, the FDA created the Safety and Standards Act that created requirements for cleanliness and sanitization for compounding pharmacies to ensure they were safe for the American consumers. Second, the historical crisis. While the FDA certified 70 pharmacies in the 2003 Safety and Standards Act, Pharmaceutical.org on September 8th, 2019 explained this number has grown to 56,000 pharmacies within the United States. They continue, of that 56,000, nearly 47% are non-compliant with FDA standards, leaving the public unregulated with pharmacies and unsafe in what they consume. But the federal government attempted to solve this problem in the beginning of 2019 in 2 crucial ways. First, they integrated the process into the FDA, and then they created bigger standards. First, the integration of this process into the FDA took it out of the hands of the state, because prior to this integration, an underfunded state meant an under-regulated pharmacy. But secondly, they created bigger standards for the industry, such as a mandatory requirement and inspection every 2 years, deeper sterility requirements, and limitations on what drugs can be produced at their facilities, in an effort to protect the American consumer. Curtis Cosby went in for cataract surgery to repair his vision, and according to Deseret News on June 3rd, 2019, he was given a solution to inject into his eye to help speed up the healing process. Cosby and 67 other victims were blinded by a botched compounding solution, highlighting the still present problems in our society. First, there are 2 problems that still persist within this industry. First, a lack of regulation, and then a lack of cohesion. First, a lack of regulation. While the FDA did create a higher standards for safety in the beginning of 2019, The Guardian on January 1st, 2020 explained it's done little good because they missed one key factor. They don't require pharmacies to be compounding certified. So a pharmacy can certify medication without having to have the certification themselves. This means that increased regulations only affect pharmacies that opt in to the more difficult certification. The Guardian continues, since 2003, the number of certified pharmacies has gone down to 70, despite the rapid increase to 56,000 pharmacies, leaving over 55,000 pharmacies unaffected by this increased regulation. But secondly, a lack of cohesion. While the FDA hails the integration of this process into its organization as its champion of compounding pharmacies, it may actually be its pitfall. Reuters on May 1st, 2019 explained this process, prior to being integrated in the state, was done at the hands of the state and then sent to the FDA. But since this integration, the process has been broken down into 4 different departments with no chairperson in front. While this is the most monetarily efficient path, it adds unnecessary steps of bureaucracy between reporting a problem and seeing a solution implemented, creating an industry that is unresponsive to the American public. Jake Steinbrecher was an 8-year-old little boy with a sensory processing disorder. His parents placed his prescription with a compounding pharmacy, and according to The Atlantic on August 1st, 2019, his prescription was 1,000 times what his doctor recommended. Jake passed away on July 8th, 2018, highlighting the still present need for solutions. Victims of compounding pharmacies need help, and America needs solutions. Working together, we can be the solution to this problem by taking 2 crucial steps. First, understanding our own choices, and then involving government action. First, in understanding our own choices, if you have the ability to, place your prescription with a standard FDA certified pharmacy. They are exponentially safer for you and your family. But if this is not an option, then look up both the FDA write-ups as well as the FDA certifications in an attempt to ensure that you are getting the safest pharmacy possible for you and your family. The first step in changing the pharmaceutical industry is ensuring we are well enough to do so. But secondly, we must involve government action to change public policy in 2 ways. First, sending a letter, and then writing legislation. First, we must send a letter to our legislatures that impress on them our need for change in the pharmaceutical industry. And I've drafted a letter that does just that. This letter is available on a website I built. It details that we have a compounding pharmacy industry that needs help and requests not only its own department for compounding pharmacies, but also a chairperson that's responsive to the American public. Find one on my website, send it to your representatives, and be the start of the change in this industry. But secondly, we must send legislation. Our legislation that I've drafted demands that we have our own department for compounding pharmacies, as well as a chairperson that will listen and address our complaints in a responsive and efficient manner. You can find this on my website as well. Print it off and send it in with the letter. Begin to be the change. To make access easy for you to be the change in the industry, I've put the URL of my website on a pin, because unlike a handout, very few people have no need for a pin. But secondly, my website is also full of information on compounding pharmacies, FDA write-ups, and FDA certifications, a complete toolkit to begin to make the change. Jocelyn Stevens, Curtis Cosby, and Jake Steinbrecher. They are just a few examples of the victims that have been harmed by compounding pharmacies. And it becomes clear after understanding the history, problems that still persist, and what we can do to help solve this crisis. When we advocate for ourselves, we are not just protecting ourselves, but changing the lives of people who cannot advocate for themselves. Pharmacies are intended to be a place where you go to get better, not to play pharmaceutical roulette.